Chapter 14. The Truth About Mr. Halfst. Franklin found himself lying in a patch of tall grass, rubbing his side. Having been sucked into another dimension and having fallen several feet to wherever he was now, he had a bruise to match the one he'd gotten from being thrown up against the wall. He looked up to see a yellow opening in the sky that was spitting sheets of crumpled paper onto the ground. His oak desk was lying next to him. One of its legs had almost snapped off in the fall. He felt fortunate the desk hadn't landed on him. Franklin sat up and instantly forgot all about his favorite desk. He was being observed by a giant eyeball, the size of a Greyhound bus, that was hovering 6 feet off the ground. He didn't want to make any quick movements, uncertain as to what a giant eyeball might do if it felt threatened. Or maybe this was a vastly intelligent eyeball that had taken over this pocket dimension and had set itself up as the supreme ruler. For all Franklin knew, the eyeball could be responsible for turning Halfst into a pocket dimension aperture, and this was how it lured subjects, or victims, into its domain. Franklin looked around cautiously, and found Chirac slumped over one of the leather armchairs, having landed on Franklin's pair of Therapist of the Year coffee cups. Their shattered remains were littered among the grass around the chair. Chirac got up and felt his midsection, which had been cut in 2 places by shards of coffee cup. His forest green button-down shirt was missing a couple buttons and was ripped in the middle. "Not only did you steal my telepathy," Franklin said, "but now you've broken my favorite mugs." Chirac picked up a large piece of one of the cups that still had some writing on it. "You were Therapist of the Year?" "Technically, no. It was another version of me from Dimension .65. We met a couple years ago. The mugs were mementos." "That's pathetic." "And now you've broken them." "What's also pathetic is that you're worried about coffee cups when we're stuck in a pocket dimension with no way to open an aperture, and there's this huge disembodied eyeball staring at us." "Maybe you should have thought about that before you tried to steal Half's powers," said Franklin. He walked away from his office furniture, and Chirac reluctantly followed. The huge eyeball turned to each of them, looking up and down and studying them. "That thing is freaking me out," said Chirac. "That's what you get," Franklin said. "You steal people's powers, you should expect to get stared at by a giant eyeball. In fact, you should consider yourself lucky. It could be a lot worse. It could have giant feet and step on you." Chirac looked annoyed. "Hey, here's a thought," said Franklin. "Maybe it's got heat vision." Chirac backed away from the eyeball. "Don't give it any ideas." "It's not like it can hear you. It doesn't have ears." "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" "Absolutely." Chirac ignored him, closed his eyes, and put his hands together. "What exactly are you doing?" "Concentrating. Leave me alone." Chirac took deep breaths and squinted his eyes hard. He grunted a few times. Nothing happened. "What are you trying to do?" asked Franklin. Chirac opened his eyes and sighed in defeat. "I'm trying to teleport us out of here." "And now you've lost your powers?" said Franklin. He threw his arms into the air. "This day couldn't get any better." Chirac looked down at his hands. "It must be something about this dimension. And I don't see why you're gloating. You're trapped here too. There's a difference between me and you. You went into this without knowing anything. It's kind of like the window cleaner. I did my homework." "Wait, you're saying you know how to get out of here?" Franklin smiled. "For the record, I was going to teleport us both out. I wasn't going to leave you here," Chirac said. "That's very kind of you. And I suppose you were going to give Mr. Halfst a cut of the profits you made off his dimension powers too, right?" "Let me explain this to you," said Chirac, sounding more like the sly businessman he had been earlier. "I live by a different ethical code." "You mean one without ethics?" "I come from a long line of career criminals. My father, his father, his father. I think his father was a hot air balloonist, but then his father before him. It's in my blood, Franklin. I am what I am. And the rest of us just have to understand, even while you're getting rich at our expense. All I expect you to understand is that I can't change." "Fine. Then I can't get us out of here." "You're joking." You'd spend the rest of your life being stared at by this giant eyeball just because I won't change my lifestyle to conform to your ideals. That's about the size of it, said Franklin. Of course, he had no intention of staying there, and he knew it would only be a matter of time before Hafs got angry again and the aperture opened. But he wasn't about to tell Chirac that. Franklin was generally open-minded, and he appreciated people with different standards than his own, but Chirac had no standards at all. There's nothing here, Chirac said. The Nixot was really starting to lose it. What are we going to eat, the eyeball? The eye floated closer and stared at Chirac. Somehow, it looked a little angrier. I wouldn't suggest it, said Franklin. I don't think you can get us out of here at all. You're just trying to humiliate me. You did that all by yourself. Believe what you want, but you've got a choice. You give me your interdimensional eBay password, and I'll tell you how to get out. Chirac snickered. You think I'm gonna fall for that? I'm the master of bluffs. I've won over a dozen superpowers just playing poker. For a brief second, Franklin wondered if Nixothian poker was anything like Nixothian pool. He started to walk away from Chirac. Fine with me. Enjoy your eye. Franklin looked behind him and watched Chirac as he walked along the thick grass. The eyeball flew higher and hovered directly over Chirac's head. Chirac moved to the right, and the eye moved with him. Frustrated, he moved back to the same spot, and still, the eye stayed with him. Before long, he was running in circles, but the eye just kept floating along above him, having no trouble keeping up with him. Franklin wondered if the eye had arbitrarily chosen not to like Chirac, or if it understood anything they had been saying and was taking Franklin's side. Chirac finally gave up and sat on the grass. The eye dropped several inches and stared at Chirac's neatly cropped hair. I can't stand this, Chirac said. No powers, no eBay, no food, and there's this enormous eye just looking at me. Why is it there? What is it thinking? You sure know how to keep your cool, Franklin said. He kept his distance, but he had stopped walking. This was too entertaining to miss. Taunt me all you want. Nothing is going to make me give up that password. Not even this eye. Franklin shrugged and took another few short steps away from Chirac. The eye moved down and positioned itself squarely in front of Chirac's face. Chirac looked nervous. He blinked, and the eye immediately rammed hard into him, knocking him to the ground. Franklin held back a laugh. What was that for? Chirac said. The eye said nothing. It just floated there until he stood up again. Oh, I get it. Well, forget it, pal. I am not having a staring contest with you. Chirac blinked again, and the eye smashed into him a second time, much harder. Chirac grabbed his scraped elbow and looked up at the eye in contempt. I bet you can't outfly a Nixot, he said. Chirac jumped into the air and flapped his wings. He rose higher and higher into the sky until he was flying away from the eye as fast as he could. The eye followed, slowly at first, and then it picked up speed. The eye was gaining on Chirac fast, and before long it was obvious to Franklin that the eye could have flown circles around him. It came up from behind and effortlessly rear-ended Chirac. He reeled in pain but kept flying. The eye hit him again, and this time Chirac flew under it and darted the other way, trying to lose it. But the eye flipped over, caught sight of Chirac, and shot toward him again. It shot 3 narrow red blasts out of its pupil, each narrowly missing Chirac. The eye was missing him on purpose, trying to surprise him. It worked. Chirac slowed down, and the eye slammed into him a third time. Franklin ran to Chirac as he rubbed sore muscles and bruises. I thought you were joking about the heat vision, Chirac said. It was just a guess. You probably shouldn't make it any angrier, or it might really try to fry you next time. That thing is not made of eyeball, said Chirac. Steel hurts less than that. So I was wondering, Franklin said, about that password. Fine, I'll tell you. And make sure you get it right. I know a dimension who'd love to suck you right back in. Suddenly, the landscape in front of them seemed to rip apart, and there was a yellow tear just above them once again, about twice the size of the menacing eyeball. Chirac gave Franklin an evil-looking smile and strode toward the aperture. I guess you'll never know. Franklin noticed another aperture directly behind them, and he saw a few papers fly out of it. Franklin grabbed one out of the air. It was a piece of stationery with his name on it. Mr. Hafs was still in his office. The wind picked up fast, and they were soon sucked toward the aperture. This time, neither of them fought it. After they entered the vortex, Franklin found himself on the floor next to Chirac, staring up at Mr. Hast. The Jexorite was smiling down at them. "Welcome back," Hast said. "Now that you're here, I'd like you to meet some friends of mine." He opened the door to Franklin's office, and two fat, scaly, sharp-toothed Jexorites walked in. They were identical twins, and they each wore the same deadpan expression. Franklin and Chirac got up off the floor to meet them. "What are you two doing here?" said Chirac. "You know them?" asked Franklin. "They're the guys who told me about Haft's powers." "We are the sons of Grith Marbazone and Kiraroma Lemt," said the man on the right. "Do you remember our names, Chirac?" "No, I don't. You just called yourselves Bob and Rupert before. What is going on here?" 30 years ago, your father stole our father's wit and imagination." "My father? You mean you set me up?" "He stole their father's what?" said Franklin. "Like I said before," Chirac said, "Dad was a con artist, just like me. But he wasn't into superpowers. He was more old-fashioned than that. He had little paper cubes that could steal your logic, reason, or even your personality traits." "Too bad you didn't take up your dad's trade," said Franklin. "Maybe you could have stolen yourself some character." "We have completed our rite of vengeance," said the limp on the left. "What did I do to you?" Chirac said. "The offspring of a Jexorite has the duty to avenge his father's shame. We have lived by this code for thousands of years." "But I'm not a Jexorite," said Chirac. "We are more enlightened than we were thousands of years ago," said the limp on the right. "We no longer discriminate between species. We have humiliated you with the sinister eye of the Half's pocket dimension and stripped you of your powers. Your father's debt is repaid." Chirac's wings beat behind him defiantly, and he stepped forward. "Pocket dimension? You said he had the powers of a dimension." "We needed to lure you to him," said the limp on the left. "As far as I know, it's impossible for someone to be a dimension." Mr. Hast pulled Chirac's paper cube from his pocket. "And I got to keep your powers as payment for my services," he said. Chirac grabbed his shirt pocket. "No! The plick stress! It's gone! It must have fallen out when that stupid eyeball hit me." "What's a plick stress?" Mr. Hast asked. "It's a device that transports the cube to my location after it's absorbed the powers around it." Franklin thought about that. Since no one else in the room had any real superpowers, and also because Chirac couldn't get out of the room fast enough as he had when he had stolen Franklin's telepathy, the cube must have absorbed all of Chirac's powers. The pocket dimension had nothing to do with why his powers wouldn't work. "Give that back," Chirac said. "Come now, Mr. Chirac," said Hast. "You know I'm far too powerful now for you to stop me." The Jexorites started to leave. "Wait," said Franklin. Hast turned to face him. "You made it all up. Your family being outcast, your life a living hell because you thought you were a dimension." "I made most of it up," said Hast, "except for opening the aperture when I get angry. I get mad really easily." "How did you do it?" "Do what?" "Become the aperture to a pocket dimension." "I bought the ability on interdimensional eBay. It's a new development in pocket dimension technology, the personal aperture. It didn't sound very useful at first, but I found a use for it. I'm sorry to deceive you, but there are a lot of opportunities in the multiverse for a man with my newfound talents." He patted his right front pants pocket. "I keep the pocket dimension itself with me at all times, right here in my wallet." "You realize what you've done makes you no better than Chirac," Franklin said. "No, I am better. Which one of us ended up with his powers? I assume you'll understand if I don't make it to our session next week." As the Jexorites left, Franklin looked at his empty office. Hast hadn't kept the aperture open nearly as long this time, since Franklin and Chirac had come through the aperture so quickly. Nothing he had lost from his office came back with them. But he wasn't worried about that. He was far more concerned that he had let himself be bested by another con artist in the same game. This time it was Chirac who had really lost everything, and while that reality came with a certain amount of poetic justice, Franklin took no pleasure in it. Chirac was heading for the door himself when Franklin stopped him. "This must be hard for you," Franklin said. "You must be loving this." "Not really." Franklin reached into his back pocket and produced a small, leather-bound day planner. "I have some openings in my schedule next week if you want to talk about it." "You want me to come in? For therapy?" "My services are open to anyone who needs them. But I stole your telepathy and got you sucked into the crappiest pocket dimension imaginable. Yes, you did. And you strike me as someone who could use some time with a licensed professional. Schrock opened the glass door and looked back at Franklin. What times do you have available next Wednesday? Wednesday is open. I don't want to be rehabilitated. I think you're too far gone for that. Schrock gave him half a smile and then walked out the door. Helena arrived at Franklin's office only an hour after he returned from the pocket dimension. He didn't plan to start replacing furniture until the next day, so he and Helena sat on brown folding chairs. Sorry about the office, said Franklin. What happened? Helena asked. She looked positively dismayed as Franklin told her the story. When he finished, she turned to leave. We can postpone this until tomorrow. That's all right. You're the most down-to-earth person I'll talk to all day. I don't think you really know any down-to-earth people. Franklin thought about that and couldn't help but agree. Franklin, have you given any thought to my request? Helena asked. Franklin swallowed. After hours of practicing what he would say, he couldn't remember a word of his speech. Dr. Kaslam has decided to give me the final word. And? I understand why you want to do this, and under different circumstances, I might be inclined to agree with you. But with circumstances as they stand, you have to understand the ethical considerations. What if what we'd really be doing was condemning 6 other women to death? And there's no way to really know what it might do to you. I want you to know that I'm terrified to leave things the way they are, but there's no other choice. Helena smiled. Good answer. Franklin looked at her in disbelief. If you'd said anything else, she said, I would have snapped your head off. Who am I talking to? I warned you, Dr. Bryce. Anything she can do, I can do better. Ah, Laura. Good to see you. You got lucky this time, and we both know you're not exactly overflowing with luck these days. Helena still wants the rest of us dead. You're going to make sure that doesn't happen. Threats aren't going to help. You don't even know how long you can keep us in that holding dimension before we break out. Mark my words, Bryce. This is a fight I intend to win. You've stepped into a war zone, and you'd better pick a side. A few moments later, Helena's dominant personality returned. You're not going to let me go through with the personality extraction. Laura's overconfident, impulsive expression was replaced with one of Helena's disappointment. No, Franklin said. At least, not yet.